Welcome, Dr. Tafari. Please explain what femicide is and the history of femicide in Jamaica.
Well, femicide is women being murdered because they're women. And how does that work in Jamaica? Well, of course, you'd have to look at our colonial past to understand the vulnerabilities that especially women of African descent have faced in this country. And from the minute that people were captured in Africa, you know, you're about your business and somebody comes and captures you to sell you into slavery. And you're marched overland for over 300, 500 miles in some cases. Can you imagine that? From here to Montego Bay. And then you're incarcerated in a dungeon underneath what is called Cape Coast Castle, built by the Danes. And that's when they occupied Ghana, what we now know as Ghana on the west coast of Africa, for over 200 years before they sold to the British in 1850. And you're underneath this castle for 5.5 months, being stored like objects before being transshipped across the Atlantic for another 3.5 months. And you get to the Caribbean. And both for production and for reproduction, you are exposed to extraordinary violence in every sphere of your life. I mean, I don't know if you've read Thomas Thistlewood's diaries. He documented in a very precise way what took place on plantations, you know, from the seasoning farms where men were routinely sodomized, especially in front of the community to demoralize the community. And women, of course, were routinely raped for both the pleasure and the production purposes that the plantations were purposed for. So when we talk about femicide, the lifespan of someone who experienced enslavement was not more than 20 years, 30 years at the most, and you had children that you saw sold off as objects again for profit. And so emotionally, psychosocially, you experience death on an everyday basis. Never mind what you physically experience by being beaten or starved or raped again or yes, overworked and murdered in so many different ways. If you again read Thomas Thistlewood's diaries, you're shocked at the devices that people invented to defecate in somebody's mouth, for example, and to make sure that they held it there for days before they had to swallow. I mean, there are people who experienced that, committed suicide, you know, and women committed infanticide to make sure that their children wouldn't grow up in a system like that. So we have inherited wounds in an epigenetic manner because it has passed down in our genes. And I think that, you know, what we experience now with women being, again, exposed to murder in a very routine way, it wasn't even like that 30, 40 years ago, because when the violence started in the 1960s, it was more of contestation between men. And, you know, it was political violence in the 1970s, coming up to 1980, which was a watershed when some 800 people were killed in political violence, which, of course, is another story. And this is where the two main political parties, the People's National Party and the Jamaica Labour Party, have armed their supporters to fight against each other, ultimately to colonize the votes in enclaves that we now call garrison communities, because, you know, they're politicized so that people of a certain stripe are the ones who benefit from the housing arrangements and that kind of thing. So in the 90s, a pattern emerged where women would be surrogate victims. So, you know, you can't catch Kwaku, you catch him shot, where a man would be the target of another man's violence. And, you know, you can't find him, so you kill his mother or his sister or his child. And so we see this pattern emerging in Jamaica until now. Of course, we cannot think about femicide in Jamaica without also looking at what has been emerging in terms of women who are partners or family members of men who work as soldiers or police or security guards. And I did actually a study of these kinds of incidents. I collected about 20 stories off the internet. And this was not an exhaustive kind of search of different instances where partners of persons whose job allow them to have a gun at their disposal have been the perpetrators of murder-suicides. And there was one notable attempt at suicide that didn't work. This policeman from Portland who killed his partner out in the marina. She had left him, and he persuaded her to have a conversation with him in a public space, and apparently she thought it was safe to do so. And right there in the gazebo, he shot her and then shot himself, and fortunately or unfortunately he didn't die. So he actually went to jail, and after 6 years of trial, you know, he was convicted of murdering his partner, which is one of the rare instances when you look in the literature where this attempt at eliminating yourself from the scene of the crime doesn't work. So that bears some studying. And the pattern of ownership of the partners is very consistent in terms of thinking that if this person leaves the relationship, you have to take them out of life. And there was a case of the security guard at the tax office downtown where the partner came in and said, "I'm going to kill you today." And she said, "Right here in front of everybody?" And he said, "Yes." And 6 shots later, he killed her and then killed himself right there. And there was a case of the woman who was dropping the child to school. And the man came and right there in front of the child, he killed her and killed himself. So there have been a number of these kinds of instances. You know, the soldier, you know, in Mandeville who, you know, cut his partner's throat and then killed himself similarly. It says to you there's a cowardice at the bottom line, because if you kill yourself, that's the cowardly way out. And if you think that you can have the authority to take somebody's life, that's also a cowardly way out, because you cannot do the strong thing, the man thing, which is to walk away, you know, to deal with your wound and to heal yourself and to try again, because there are thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of persons in life. Why do you think that you have the authority? But you can connect this to the enslavement history, because the fact that we come from a history where our bodies were owned to the extent that they were branded, to the extent that most people still bear the names of their enslavers. And, you know, we as African people are not called Wilson or Patterson or Smith.
Well, let me hear you say mountain, mountain.